Nun Ches Amud Aleph, the Gemara right after Mishnah, the beginning of the Gemara. The Gemara Minna Hani Mili. The Mishnah said that in a regular day, the Talmud shall be in Arabayim, the shlit is on 8.5 hours into the day. That's when they did the shlit and the Avodas Adam, and it was Kara Betisha Umerse. It was burnt on the Mizbeach 9.5 hours of the day. How do we know that? Omer Mishu ben Levi, the Omer Kro, es hakeves echo, tasa babek, ve'es hakeves hasheni, tasa ben harabayim. The pasuk says that as far as the Talmud goes, the Talmud shel shachar is in the morning, and the afternoon is ben harabayim. It doesn't say ba'erev, it says ben harabayim. So we darshan it to mean 2 afternoons. Chalkeo levein shnei aravim. Divide the afternoon into 2 afternoons. Shtei shos amechs lekan, ushtei shos amechs lekan. V'sho achas lasi also. So you have in the afternoon, after midday, you have 6 hours. There's 6 hours. We know that there is 1 hour is needed for the burning on the Mizbeach. So then you have 5 hours left, 5 hours in the afternoon. It says Bein Harabayim, divided into 2 afternoons. That means each afternoon is 2.5 hours. So the Talmud shel Bein Harabayim is in the second afternoon. So after 2.5 hours of the day, meaning after at 8.5 hours of the day, that's when the shchita of the Talmud shel Bein Harabayim took place. How can you say that? You're telling me that this is a deraisa de gedin. That midaraisa, the Talmud is nishchat only after 8.5 hours. We learned in the Mishnah, Arvi Pesachim nishchat b'sheva mechsa v'kara b'shmoina mechsa. On Erev Pesach, since we needed extra time for the akrava, the Korban Pesach, we were makdim it. We made the Talmud shel Bein Harabayim, made it earlier. And we did it not at 8.5 hours of the day. The shchita was at 7.5 hours of the day. Ben b'chol, ben b'shabbos. Now the isal gedaytach shmoina mechsa da'araisa heiche maktamina lei. If you're telling me this is da'araisa the gedin, how can you make it earlier? If you're telling me da'araisa, it has to be at the 8.5 hours. So just because it's Erev Pesach, they need to be makriv the korbanos, but how can you be makriv the Talmud shel Bein Harabayim earlier than you could midaraisa? So therefore, it cannot be that midaraisa is at 8.5 hours of the day. Elam marava enecham. It's not the pshat. Mitzvah so the Talmud mishanot tzal ne'ar. The din deraisa of the Talmud shel Bein Harabayim is in the afternoon, meaning any time after 6.5 hours of the day would be kosher to do it. Because the Torah says, my taima, the Torah says, the Amar Kro Bein Harabayim. It says in the afternoon. So it means the afternoon. Afternoon, me'idna demaslo shim shalamar, from the time that the sun starts to set. So the time that it's Talmud is Mishinot Tzal, when it starts to cast a shadow to the east in the afternoon, after the noontime. So midaraisa, any time after the noontime is kosher to do it. So therefore, it is midaraisa 6.5 hours of the day after the noontime, meaning after the time when it starts to cast a shadow. Then it's kosher to do it. Midaraisa in 6.5 hours of the day would be kosher. Now, why do we do it later? If that's the case, why do we say that normally you shacht it at 8.5 hours of the day? Why don't we say we should apply a principle as reason makdim l'mitzvahs, like normally we do by mitzvahs, do it as early as possible. So why do we delay it till 8.5 hours of the day? Because on the regular day, you have to, people bring their own korbanos, the nadarim and the nadavos. And the nadarim and the nadavos, you can't be makriv after the Talmud shel Bein Harabayim. Like we mentioned, except for the Korban Pesach, generally speaking, you cannot be makriv korbanos after the Talmud shel Bein Harabayim. And therefore, all of these things, korbanos, had to be done prior. So you needed more time. So therefore, during the rest of the year, Deacon Nadarim and Nadavos, the Rachmana Alma, the Torah says, Aleh Chalvei Shlomim. So the Torah says, Varach la'oil v'hikter Aleh Chalvei Shlomim. So it says, we darshan Aleh Chalvei Shlomim, meaning V'amarmar Aleh Hashlim Kol HaKarbonos Kulam. We darshan Aleh Hashlomim, Aleh Chalvei Shlomim, that Hashlim, a lotion of Pimashlim, to complete. Meaning, after the Talmud Shel Shachar. You have to be mashlim all the korbanos, but you can't do it after the Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim. The hashlama has to be after the Talmud Shel Shachar, aleh hashlim, then you complete all the korbanos, then, but not after the Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim. So you needed more time. So you delay during the rest of the year, you delay the Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim to give an opportunity to be makar of the other korbanos. So ma'achrei tate shah, we delay it 2 hours, and we say vavdim le b'shmona mechsa, and we do it at 8.5 hours of the day. Va'arvi psochim. So that's what we do normally. Now, in our psom dik Pesach achra, when you have to be makar after the Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim, that's when you do the Korban Pesach, as we'll darshan in the Gemara will see. So kadmina leishah achas vavdim le b'sheva mechsa. We then make it earlier, and we do 7.5 hours of the day to give more time for the Korban Pesach, to give time for the people to do the Korban Pesach. Chal Erev Pesach Liyos Erev Shabbos. But when the Korban Pesach is, when Erev Pesach rather is Yudalit is on Erev Shabbos, when Yudalit is on Erev Shabbos. So now the economics also the Leidach Shabbos, you have to do not only the shlit and the krav of the Korban Pesach, but also the roasting it, because that's not Deich Shabbos. The roasting can be done on Friday. And the roasting is done for a personal need. It's not part of the akrov, it's part of the achila. It's not Deich Shabbos. You need an extra hour. We do it, and we do it on 6.5 hours a day, and we're makdim it even more, and we do 6.5 hours a day. So that's why we have the Seder. Normally we shechted at 8.5 hours a day. If it's Erev Pesach, on Yudal, you have to do the Korban Pesach, you're makdim it 1 more hour. You're makdim it an extra hour, and to give time for the Korban Pesach. But you still have to do the Nedorim and the Dovis. So therefore, we're makdim it to from 8.5 to 7.5 hours. That is on a case when you have Erev Pesach, then you have to be makdim it an hour, an extra hour. Now, if it is on Erev Shabbos, if Erev Pesach is Erev Shabbos, then you need an extra hour. You need an extra hour to do the tzliyah. So therefore, you're makdim it even to 6.5 hours in order to accommodate the roasting of the Korban Pesach. Now, if it falls out on Shabbos, if Yudala falls out on Shabbos, we said that, and our Mishnah says you're makdim it to 7.5 hours. You're makdim to 7.5 hours, and in order to give more time for the Korban Pesach. So that is the cheshbon. Normally we give time from the Darb and the Dovis, and therefore the Talmud is nishchad normally at 8.5 hours of the day. On Erev Pesach you need more time for the Korban Pesach, you do it at 7.5. And on a Erev Pesach, that's Erev Shabbos, you have to accommodate also the roasting, you do it at 6.5. Tana Rabbanon, we learn in the Brisa, Kisidur B'chol, just like the order is during the weekday, Kach Sidur B'Shabbos, Div Rabbi Shmuel. That's the way you do it on Shabbos, that's what Rabbi Shmuel says. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Kisidur B'Erev Pesach. He says, like the order on Erev Pesach. My Komer, what does this mean? Omar Abaya Hachi Koma Kiesidura Bechol Be'erev Pesach. Just like if Erev Pesach is on a weekday, meaning the shlit is at 7.5 hours. Kach Sidura B'Shabbos Be'erev Pesach. So too, if Erev Pesach falls on a Shabbos, it's also 7.5 hours. Div Rabbi Shmuel. And Rabbi Kiva says no. Kiesidura Be'erev Pesach Shechal Yos Be'erev Shabbos. Just like on Erev Pesach that falls out on Erev Shabbos, which is at 6.5 hours. Kach Sidura B'Shabbos. So too, Erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbos, it's also at 6.5 hours. Umas Nisan Diktani Bein B'chol Bein B'Shabbos, Rabbi Shmuel. And the Mishnah that says Bein B'chol Bein B'Shabbos is Rabbi Shmuel. It's going according to Rabbi Shmuel that says that the 7.5 hours, you do it at 7.5 hours, it's when you dull it, it's on Chol. On Shabbos, it's 7.5 hours, it's Rabbi Shmuel, because according to Rabbi Kiva, it's not that way. What is the machlekes? Totally on what's the basis of the machlekes? The machlekes is when do you do, what's the order of the korban musaf and the burning of the levina and the bezich? And on Shabbos, in addition to the Talmud, you had a korban musaf. And you had to accommodate that in the schedule. You also had the burning of the levina from the bezich, and the bezich were on the shulchan. And on Shabbos, they removed it from the shulchan, they took it out to the mizbeach, and they burnt it, and then the lechem aponim were distributed to the kohanim, and they were able to eat them. So that procedure of the bezich and the chiluk aponim, lechem aponim, took roughly an hour. The question is, what was the order? Which came first, the musafim or the bezich? So, Rabbi Shmuel Savra, he holds Musafim Kaidon Bezich. First you did the Musafim, then the Bezich. So, Avale the Musafim B'Sheish, they were Makriv the Korban Musaf and the 6th hour. Ubazichin B'Sheva. And from the beginning of the 7th hour, they were Makriv the Bezichin. So that took an hour. Avale the Talmud B'Sheva Mechsa. Then after 7.5 hours, then after 7.5 hours from the beginning of the day, that's when they did the Talmud. As Rashi points out, really, you should say it from the beginning of the 7th hour, because the Chiluk Lechem Aponim only took an hour, but sometimes it took a little more. But in any event, as we mentioned before, we try to keep the times uniform. We try not to make a difference in the day and the different times and make more time frames. So therefore, we try to keep it uniform. We say 7.5 hours. Rabbi Kiva Savra, he holds, however, no, Bazich and Kaimel Musafim. First there was the Bazich and then the Musafim. So Bazich, and they did B'chamesh, you did Bazich B'chamesh, and Musafim B'sheish. And you did the Musafim B'sheish, V'avel Tamim B'sheish U'mersa. And then you did the Tamid B'sheish U'mersa. So depending on what the order was, that's where you would have more time than to be able to do the Talmud Shel Ben Abayim earlier or later. Maskeflo Rav Yasakash Midi Rabbi Akiva Besidura Be'erev Shabbos Shechal Yais Be'erev Shabbos Ketani. You're telling me that Rabbi Akiva says that the Siddur is like Erev Pesach on Erev Shabbos. Well, then the ikar point is that Erev Shabbos, that's an ikar part of the equation. That should be mentioned. It shouldn't say it, leave that out. That should not be omitted. It doesn't say that, however. Kisidur be'erev Pesach stomach katani. It only says Kisidur be'erev Pesach. Therefore, he says a different shot. Ela Omar Rava Hachi Kamar. This is what he means. Kisidura b'chol the alma, like the order on a regular weekday. Meaning, what the Talmud is at 8.5 hours. Kach sidura b'Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. So too, it is kach sidura b'Shabbos be'erev Pesach rather. That is the siddur that is on Shabbos be'erev Pesach. So just like on a weekday, the Talmud, a regular weekday, it's 8.5. So too, on erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbos, then it's also 8.5 hours. The Rabbi Shmuel, he says that on erev Pesach, if it's on Shabbos, then it's also at 8.5 hours. And Rabbi Kiva Omer Kisidrei be'erev Pesach. And Rabbi Kiva says no, just like on a regular erev Pesach. And erev Pesach on Yudal falls out on a weekday, it's 7.5 hours. So too, if it falls out on Shabbos. Now, what's the difference between Shabbos and between a weekday? If Yudalit is on Shabbos or Yudalit is on a weekday, the chiluk is, the difference is that on a weekday you shech the korban Pesach and you do the avodah, you can also roast it. But on Shabbos, like we mentioned, the roasting is not Deicha Shabbos. So therefore, that is an issue over here. So do we say on erev Pesach that is on Shabbos, do we do it at 7.5 hours like a regular erev Pesach to accommodate the korban Pesach, or like a regular weekday, which is not Erev Pesach, which is at 8.5 hours. Umas Nisan Diktani Bein B'chol Bein B'Shabbos, and our Mishnah says that it's Bein B'chol Bein B'Shabbos, that it's 7.5 hours. Whether Erev Pesach is a Chol and Shabbos, that's Rabbi Akiva. It comes out that that's Rabbi Akiva. Why should I say that Shabbos, Erev Pesach and Shabbos is different? They're arguing whether we're concerned about the basar, the meat of the Korban Pesach, getting warm and getting spoiled. Rabbi Shmuel that we're concerned that if you leave it until the nighttime, and it's such a long period of time, that it'll get spoiled in the heat. And therefore we say, rather do the shchita later, do it at 8.5 hours, so do it later so that we don't have this concern of the spoilage. And Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva says we're not concerned about mechor besra. And therefore, he says, you can do the Talmud earlier, you do the Korban Pesach earlier, so that you have more time for the Korban Pesach. Well, if that's the case, then why don't you say, do it even at 6.5 hours? You should do it even at 6.5 hours. If you're not concerned with the Mechmar Bisra, then do it even earlier. There's no Nadar Medavos on Shabbos. And therefore, we should allow more time. We should allow more time for the hakrova of the Korban Pesach. More answers no. Kasavara musafim kaidem levazichen. He holds that the musaf comes before the vasichin, and avul musafim b'sheish. The musaf is done b'sheish, and vasichin b'sheva. Avul l'talmid b'sheva mersa. So that's why you do it in that order. Maskef lo Rabba Barula midi kesidroi b'chol kach sidro b'Shabbos b'erev Pesach divrei Shmuel ketane. Does it say kesidro b'chol like the order is on a weekday? That is the order on Shabbos b'erev Pesach. That's what Shmuel says. No, he doesn't say that. He says kach sidro b'Shabbos stama ketane. He just says in Shabbos. He doesn't say erev Pesach. So therefore, that's not an acceptable pshat.